Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar called Cultural Integration Through Conserving Energy. My name is Hanife Chitlak, and I'm part of the team at Academy Association, which is a nonprofit organization based in Frankfurt and works on projects promoting social inclusion, education, and sustainability across Europe. And before we begin, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. So this session is one of the first steps of Ecoculture project and is part of our broader effort to explore the roots of climate crisis and how we can communicate solutions effectively and take meaningful action both individually and within our communities. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today, Simone Bege, who will
Hello,
guide us
everyone.
through today's topic. So, without further ado, I'm happy to hand over to you, Ms. Wege.
All right, thank you so much. So if it's all right for you, just call me Simone. I'm happy to call you by your
Okay.
first name if that's fine. So I'm really
Okay.
stoked to be talking to so many facilitators across 3 countries. And thank you so much for working with youth and thereby driving change and building communities. This is really at the core of what we need in order to, yeah, create change. And so I'm interested where you actually are located. So if you like to share, you can write in the chat where you are currently sitting. I am in Frankfurt, Germany, and yeah, I'm curious to see where all of you are from.
Let's see.
Hello.
Cool.
All right. Good. Oh, we're all spread out over Germany, Lithuania. Yeah, I've been to Vilnius 2 times now, I think. I have not been to Poland yet, so I have to travel there. All right, and then the second thing I'm interested in, keep writing your locations if you like, is what kind of age groups do you work with? So when you're working with the youth, what kind of yeah, ages do they have? You can write that. So I'm in the picture. Oh wow. Everyone. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks. I'll gladly accept the invite. All right, so it kind of, yeah, it's a majority of like 20-ish, 30-ish, and then younger and older as well. So the foundation of everything that we talk about is the following. We don't need to save the climate. We need to save ourselves. That's basically the core measure, the core message. And so we often talk about nature or sustainability as if it's something separate from us, but we are part of many systems, and whatever we do to environment, we do to ourselves in the end. And on the other hand, everything that we do in order to foster more healthy ecosystems and nature, that serves us as well. So we have more healthy living conditions. So that's basically the foundation of everything that we'll do. And then we'll have a look at the following things. I'll have to close the chat. Does that work? Yes. So today we will talk about how to effectively talk about the climate crisis in order to motivate people to take action. We'll talk about why we do suffer from the climate crisis, how it came to be and what we can do about it. We'll have a look at the global energy consumption. Where does it come from? What is the status quo? And then we'll also look at the solutions, most importantly, what we can do in order to reduce energy consumption and also thrive and yeah, kind of change the image from having to limit ourselves to what do we gain when we become active. So that's, yeah, one really big shift that we need to make. We'll have a look at the activities in the toolkit, and then there will be a chance to ask questions. If you have questions in between, please feel free to ask them. In order for me to see it, I think it's most helpful if you raise your hand in Zoom. And if I do not see somebody's raised hand, maybe Frau Chitlak, you can direct it to
Yeah,
me so that I can.
They can also write in the chat, and I will.
Perfect. Yes. All right. So when we talk about climate change, it is very important that we create psychological proximity. What does that mean? We need to express that the climate crisis is here, meaning now. It is here locally. We are affected, and we are sure that there is climate crisis and we are the cause of it. So we'll go through it one by one. When we talk about the climate crisis, it feels like it's somewhere far off in the future. So in 2050, maybe it'll be more hot. But in fact, we do know, and we notice it, that the effects are here already and they're getting worse. And so whenever we talk about climate crisis, it's important to make people understand that they are affected already. So in our cases, for example, in 2020, there were lots of wildfires in the Biobsza, I hope I pronounce it correctly, national park in Poland. While the climate crisis itself does not cause wildfires, it increases the probability of them happening. Because if you have long periods of droughts, then the forests are under stress and they cannot really withstand a fire as well as if it rains regularly. On the other hand, we have floods endangering people. This has been happening in Europe in the past years quite a lot, and we do notice a rise in these events. So this is what's happening already time-wise. Then if we look at where it's happening, still when we talk about climate crisis, we kind of think of faraway places like the North Pole or the rainforest, and then we think, well, the negative effects are somewhere else, but in fact, we are already affected. This image is from Vilnius. We see the River Neris, and
Mona, we cannot see your screen at the moment, so can you share?
Okay. So you couldn't see any of it?
Yeah, I thought you were just
Oh no.
you're just introducing the topic, I thought.
No, I'm so sorry. Okay, thank you.
I can see it.
Okay, maybe I'll stop presenting and then start again. I don't know why it happened.
Yeah, I cannot see it.
Thank you for.
Yeah, that would be great. There's something wrong with my Zoom, not yours. But
No. Thank you. All right, we'll try again. Hold on. Zoom.
Oh yeah. No, I guess.
No.
Okay.
But I want to. But it's not full screen right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is it? Do you see the full screen now?
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh no. Okay, I'll show you the pictures again. So we need to talk about it concerning the time, temporal. So it's not far away time-wise, but it's happening now. That was the image here. Wildfires in the national park. And then we need to talk about that it's happening here locally. And so this is an image of the River Neris that runs through Vilnius in Lithuania. And the climate crisis affects the health of our rivers, and not just our rivers, but the rivers, they are important for our leisure time. They're important for trade. They're important for our food security. In the rivers, we have algae and fish. And if the temperature rises, then they cannot thrive, and then we feel the effects. So it's not just far away, but it's here locally, and we are affected both with the negative effects, and if we do become active, we can thrive as well as nature can. Then if we talk about climate crisis, an image that has been used quite often is the poor ice bear that is trying to walk across the ice floes, and he's kind of suffering because the ice is melting. While a lot of people have sympathy towards or empathy towards an ice bear, if we think about our everyday lives, we don't have an ice bear in our everyday life. And if I think about myself, then I saw one when I was a child visiting a zoo. And so while we have close emotional connections to animals, to some, if we decide, it still doesn't really convey the effects that climate change has on us. So when we talk about climate change, we need to show images of people that we care about and that we understand, okay, we are affected as well. And so here you can see an image that was taken in Frankfurt in 2023. There was a heat wave, and lots of people are affected by heat negatively. So pregnant women, for example, or elderly people, or students in schools who cannot concentrate well because, yeah, the buildings are, first of all, not equipped for such heat. And then it's, yeah, the hotter it gets, the less concentration we have. So we need to communicate that we are affected by climate crisis now, locally, and that people that we care about are affected. And the final thing that's really important when talking about climate crisis is to convey that we are sure that there is climate crisis and that we as humans are the cause of it. Maybe you've already heard about the concept of false balance. So when we watch talk shows, for example, you have a group of different people discussing one topic, and then there's a representative for each opinion. And while we have a vast body of climate scientists who agree that, yes, there is climate crisis and we are the cause of it, there's one person representing that opinion, and then there's another person saying, well, we're not that sure. And then it looks like it's 50-50, but in fact, there's a vast majority saying we are the cause of it and we can do something. And there's a small, tiny part of it that suggests, well, there are some people who deny it. And so we need to be really careful about how we present certain arguments and certain opinions, because we know that there is a climate crisis, we know that it's here, and we know that we can do something about it. This is basically the foundation of what we do in climate communication. So when we talk about the climate crisis, there's bound to be lots of feelings. And while we as humans like to think of ourselves as being really rational, we are basically driven by our needs and our feelings, either doing something because we want to feel something or not doing something because we want to deny a certain or avoid a certain feeling. So whenever we talk about the climate crisis, lots of emotions come up, and it's really important to give space to these emotions. So people can feel really angry because maybe they've not contributed to climate change, but they're suffering from it. Or people can feel sad because they're losing nature that they really enjoyed as a child, and maybe nature's changed. Or maybe you feel numb or really overwhelmed and you cannot bear to kind of do something about it. It feels like you can't do something about it, but it's all part of it. And everybody reacts differently, so it's really important to include feelings. And feelings can drive change, because if I feel angry, well, I want to change something, I want to do something about it. If I feel helpless, it really helps to join a group, to feel connected to others, to feel like, yes, we can do something. And so the climate feelings are really an integral part of reaching people and understanding why it's also so difficult to change one's behavior, because we do have to realize that we have to change our society, and change is exhausting. And so we need to talk about what is the gain, what is something that we can work towards, because often trying to avoid something is connected to rather negative or unpleasant feelings, while working towards something is connected with feelings like curiosity or joy. And so let's say less trying to work against climate crisis, and say more creating a healthy living environment, creating communities, creating just societies. So there's lots of possibilities to shift the way that we talk about climate crisis in order to invite action in. Are there any questions so far? Okay, then I'll continue. So how did we bring about the climate crisis? It's quite astonishing that we as humans managed to change the workings of an entire planet. We did it. how did we do that? First of all, we need to understand that CO2, which is of course a big driving force in the climate crisis, is not bad per se. So because we have CO2, we have a natural isolating effect. So with so we have the Earth, we have the atmosphere, and then we have space. And we are guarded from space by this insulating layer of greenhouse gases, which are water, CO2, methane, all of these, which occur naturally. Because they are there, they kind of retain the heat from the core of the Earth and also the sun rays that come externally, and they heat up the atmosphere. And this means that in general, and on average, we have a temperature of about 15 degrees Celsius. If we did not have any CO2 in our atmosphere, or if we did not have the greenhouse effect, it would be quite cold. It would be minus 18 degrees. So the greenhouse effect per se is not bad. It's something that was created in the evolution of our Earth. But what we did as humans, starting with the Industrial Revolution, is to burn fossil fuels. And when you burn fossil fuels, you emit CO2. So that insulating layer becomes more dense, becomes more active, and thereby retains more heat. And so it becomes warmer. And you could say, well, those few degrees might not do much damage, but if you think about you having fever or an organism that's in equilibrium, and if it's only a tiny bit off, you feel the negative effects. And because we do feel the negative effects, in 2015, we had the global community decide that we want to limit global warming to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius in comparison to the pre-industrial times. Now, before we look at what fossil fuels do, we'll have to understand how the CO2 cycle actually works. So CO2 is in the air. We don't smell it, but it's a tiny, tiny part of the composition of our air that surrounds us. And plants, with the help of sunlight and water, can bind that CO2 from the atmosphere and transform it into sugar, and then transform sugar into starch and organic material, and thereby grow. So what plants actually do is they bind CO2 from the atmosphere into their organic matter. And as a basically a byproduct, they emit oxygen, which is not of any use to them per se, and we're quite lucky that we can use it to breathe. When the plant dies, other animals eat the plant and thereby emit CO2 and breathe oxygen. And so there's a constant cycle of CO2 being in the air and being bound. So that's natural. Now, if we look at how fossil fuels actually came to be, we can imagine that there's this huge ocean, there's lots of algae in the water, there's some trees. And so these plants do photosynthesis. They bind CO2 from the atmosphere, they grow, and then when they die, they sometimes fall into the water. In a depth of 200 meters, below that, the plants cannot decompose with oxygen because there's no oxygen at that level anymore. And so the organic matter, which is bound CO2, just floats down. And this happens over millions of years. And so the black part that you see, it's called sapropel. So this is basically like a fouly organic matter. And then over millions of years, other things fall into the ocean as well. So sand and other stones and minerals. And so there's big layers that are putting pressure onto that organic matter. And because of the high pressure and rising temperatures underneath there's a chemical reaction and oil and gas are generated. And because of that pressure, then it kind of wants to go somewhere, and it's being pushed up, and it rises until it meets a layer that cannot be passed, like salt or clay. And then we have these deposits of gas and oil. And then we as humans come and think, oh, well, this burns perfectly, let's use it. And so if we think about what oil is, it's basically condensed CO2 that used to be in the atmosphere millions and millions of years ago. And so what we did as humans, we are now, or what we're doing, we're now setting free that CO2 that has been deposited for millions of years in a very short window of time. And so there's so much CO2 in the atmosphere that it's more than it's used to be. And that's what we can measure when we drill for oil. We basically extract CO2 that was in the atmosphere and is now liquid, and then we burn it and use it to create plastics and all of the other things. And so how do we know that the concentration of CO2 actually rises? We cannot really travel back in time and measure the atmosphere, but what we can do is go to the Arctic, for example, and drill an ice core. And in that ice core, there's lots of tiny bubbles, air bubbles or air pockets. And in these air pockets, you can measure how many molecules of CO2 there are. And that kind of gives us information about how the concentration was a few thousand years ago and how it developed. And then ever since 1800s, we also measured ourselves. So we see that there is a really stark rising as soon as we humans step on the stage and we burn fossil fuels. We also see a rise in methane. Methane is used or emitted because of dairy and meat production, because cows belch, and also with fertilizers they're used. So our activity as humans for our food production and for our transportation causes more CO2 and more methane to be in the atmosphere, and thereby causes a rise in global temperature. And here it's really important to differentiate between climate and weather. So weather means it can be hot in the winter and it can be cold in summer for a few days, but climate means there's a general trend that we can measure. So you can see lots of different changes of direction, but the general direction is upwards. And we already have 1.6 degrees above the pre-industrial times that we currently measure. So we are already past that 1.5 degrees. So what are the effects of climate change? First of all, we have the rising temperatures, and the rising temperatures, they mean that, or they cause that the icebergs are, for example, melting. Then if the ice is melting, there's the stone that is suddenly visible to the sunlight, and it's dark, and dark bodies heat up more quickly than white bodies. Less light is reflected, so it kind of accelerates even more because of the melting ice. The sea levels rise. We have problems with people having to evacuate from islands and coastal areas. And because of the rising amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, we have more acidic oceans, because if the CO2 dissolves, or kind of, there's a solution in the water, it becomes more acidic. And then, of course, if the ecosystem changes, then lots of organisms, they suffer. So you maybe heard of the coral bleaching. You've maybe heard of temperatures rising, so that the algae cannot really function anymore. And the algae are much more important to see oxygen production than forests are. So it's really having an overall effect. And we as humans, we notice the weather extremes. So as you can see, everything is connected, and one thing kind of accelerates the other. And this is also the reason, why we have these 1.5 or 2 degrees as a limit. Those numbers are not out of thin air, but the scientists calculated that until these temperatures, we kind of can stop the system. We can try to create a balance again. But once we surpass this point, we cannot really say what domino effect will start. And so it's really important that we do everything in our power to stop emitting any CO2. It's not climate crisis yes or climate crisis no, but it's about how severe will it be. And that's why it's really, really crucial for everybody on every level. So on the individual level, on the company level, on country, on international level, that we do everything in our power to stop emitting CO2 in order to lessen these effects, because it can be really beautiful if we create more just systems, more food stability, more security. We will have less climate refugees. So it will have a really positive effect on our overall living conditions if we do become active. So these have been lots of facts. So maybe you can try to stretch and move around a bit, take a drink of water. It's been, half an hour already. So after 20 minutes, it's important to kind of take a big breath, move around, do whatever you need, or a minute, and then I'll continue. And if there are any questions, you can post them in the chat.
I think there is no questions.
Okay.
If there is, I will direct them to you.
Thank you so much. All right, so we're talking about energy. Now you have the basics of how everything is connected, how we need to talk about climate change. Now let's look at what is the status quo concerning energy. Whoops. So what you can see here is, first of all, we have a rising demand of energy. So starting in the 1800s until 2023, we see that we use, as a global community, more and more energy for various reasons. We use energy for our transportation, for heating, for the internet, for creating goods. We see that our demand rises, and rises quite a bit. What we also see in this chart is what kind of energy sources we use. So traditional biomass means wood, basically. Then we have coal and oil, and you can see that these are still predominantly the sources that we use. We have natural gas, and then starting from nuclear upwards, these are the renewable energies. There is a discussion if you can talk about nuclear power as a renewable energy. I am of the opinion that while it does not really emit CO2, it is not part of the solution, because we still don't know what to do with the waste. That's just as a side comment. But we have hydropower, wind power, solar power, biofuels, and other renewables. So the problem is, with our current society, is that we still have a linear economy. So we take resources, we make something out of it, we use it, sometimes only once, and then it's waste. And we either burn the waste, or we bury it somewhere, or we throw it out and then it ends up somewhere else. And this is the norm. It's quite crazy to think that this is how we do things. The problem is that all the negative effects that we suffer from, so all the plastics in the environment, the bad air quality, all the oil that we extract, it's not part of the actual price. So it's not a true cost economy that we're currently living in, but it externalizes all the negative effects. And a small group of people gets to enjoy the benefits of doing economy like this, and the majority of us, they suffer from the consequences. So we really need a shift to a circular economy, meaning that we take resources, we make something out of it, we use it, we collect it, we transform it, we share it, we adapt it, and so it's used more than once, and thereby stays within the cycle. And nature itself has no concept of waste. So whenever something dies in nature, something else eats from it or transforms it into something else. We basically, as humans, invented the concept of waste. And so we really need to shift and transform the way that we we use our economy into a more circular way. And of course, there will be waste, but there will be much less waste than we currently use. And so, for example, plastic is a big, big problem of our times. Plastic, maybe I don't know if you've already thought about this, is made of oil. So we use oil to make plastic, to create packaging that is used basically for 15 minutes to transport it from the supermarket to your home, and then it ends up as waste. And as you know, plastic does not decompose, but it stays in the environment and just breaks down into tiny, tiny particles. And it's a problem for the next at least 405 years, 50 years. So, and this is the norm. And it's really weird that this is the norm. It really needs to change. And because these things are still the norm, we still have a rising need for energy. And so what we need to do, and it's already happening, and this is kind of hopeful, is that we do see that the sources that we use in order to get all the energy that we need for our current lifestyles, they change. So as you can see, we use less wood, we use less coal, less oil, and then tiny, tiny bits of the renewable energies, they grow bigger. So of course, our systems become more efficient. And then we also use different energies that emit less CO2. So that's a good point. We see that change is happening, and the majority of the power plants that are being installed now are renewable energies. So the shift has started. It basically cannot be stopped. So that's something that can make you really, really hopeful. But we really need to speed it up. The change needs to happen more quickly. And now I would like you to look at this graph and think about if you've ever felt like this. And if you did feel like this, you can raise your hand. I can see you in the picture. So it basically means you trying to act sustainably in your everyday life, but it feels like you're basically rolling a boulder up a hill because you live in a system that is unsustainable. And so that is a problem because you're trying to do the right thing, but basically the world works against you. And we need to change that. So what happened here is, maybe you've already heard about the ecological footprint. That is a helpful measure to try to understand the effects of your, the way that you live on the environment. While the concept of the ecological footprint can be helpful to understand how things are connected and how we use up our resources, the way that it was used is kind of manipulative, because the oil company Exxon and British Petroleum, so BP, they used it as a marketing incentive to put the blame from them, companies that drill for oil and basically make money from extracting oil, to put it on the consumer and basically tell them, well, if you make the right consumer decision, and if you change your life, then you can change the course of things. But it also meant that they can keep doing what they did, because they did hire scientists, and they did know already in the 1970s that their drilling for oil does really contribute to climate change, and they continued doing it while putting the pressure and the responsibility on the individual. And so we need to shift our focus from the ecological footprint, measures that we can take as individuals, to changing the norm itself. So if you look back, we need to change that we're going uphill trying to be ecological. And sustainability, in effect, should be the most easy, the most cheap, the most joyful thing to do. And in order for us to reach that part, we need to change the structures themselves. And that we can do with the handprint. The handprint means what I can do as an individual to create change within a community. So for example, if I order a coffee somewhere, and then I can decide as an individual to bring my own cup from home and then ask them to fill the coffee in there directly. That will be my footprint. That will be an individual action by myself. And that's a nice thing to do. And maybe other people see it and you inspire change. That's good. But the more effective thing for me would be to talk to the owners of the coffee shop and maybe ask them, hey, do you want to join in this deposit system where you have a cup that you can lend to people, they pay your deposit, and they can hand it back at your coffee shop and other coffee shops, and thereby you made it the norm, you made it a possibility for everybody else who maybe was not thinking about the waste issue that much. And then you created much bigger change. And so this is really important when you talk with your youth and your participants is, yes, they should understand the effects of their own actions. So they should understand the footprint, but they should focus much more on what actions they can take to drive real change so that it becomes the norm to be sustainable. That's really the most important thing, because we often fight against one another, criticizing each other for, well, you didn't do it perfectly. And then we feel bad because we still make mistakes in a very unsustainable system. Whereas we should all come together and work together to change the system itself. And if that feels utopian, then it always helps to look back in time, because the things that feel normal or are normal now, they were utopian back then. And people thought, well, we need to change things. And now we have women's rights, and we have seatbelts in cars, and we have rules for air quality, for example. Those were all not the norms a few years back. And now we take them for granted. And so other things are possible as well. So basically everything is made up. And so we can change society. And it's really important to create that revolutionary creativity, or to foster that for youth and people in general, to understand I can take a step back and I can think about, why is that normal? It's not normal what we do. It's not healthy. Let's change it. So that's a really important shift from the footprint to the handprint. Now, we do take a step back and we look at the numbers now. So what does it actually mean? How much energy do we use up? And this is a graph depicting the German situation. So a typical German citizen, a regular citizen, uses up about 10.3 tons of CO2 per capita, so per person, or emits CO2 through his lifestyle, through her lifestyle. What would be fair and what would be sustainable is less than 1 ton. And so this is a really, really big change that we need to do. And on the left-hand side, you can see the departments where it comes from. So lots of it comes from living in a house. So we need to heat our house. And as you saw, still most of our energy sources are fossil fuels. So that's a big part of it. We need to power all our devices. So that's something we need to we need to travel. So it depends on if we take the car, the plane, the bike, the bus. It really makes a big difference how we eat and what we consume. That's a big part. And then just by using the infrastructure, so just by using the streets, just by using the supplies that are necessary for living, which I as an individual can hardly change, I already use up 1.2 tons. So we need to also change that. We need to change the way that we build things. So that's 10.3 tons currently, and we need to break it down or diminish it to more than half. How can we do that? There are actually 5 steps that you can take, which really easily, basically, or just with a few minor things, have a huge effect. So it's in German, but you can see from the images, a big effect is if you, in the dark blue area, consume less. And by consuming less, it's important not to think of it as less quality of living, but more aware consumption. So often we buy something because we're really stressed, we had a stressful week, and then we think, oh, now I've deserved this, or I really need this because we have advertisement and they make us want things. But maybe if you buy something, a piece of clothing, you think you're fulfilling your own need, but you actually just want to be accepted. You want to be part of a group. So your need is basically social connection, but we solve it by buying something. And so we really need to reflect on the habits of why we buy and what we buy. And if we become more conscious of it, we can really lower our footprint there. Then, of course, we can drive less cars. It depends on if you live in a more rural or more suburban area. Then it's more easy, more difficult, depending on where you are. We can decide on where our electricity comes from. So, of course, mostly you as a person who lives in a flat or in a house, depending on where you are in the city, you can decide where your electricity comes from. And if you choose a provider that actually finances the switch from fossil fuels to true renewables, then you're really driving change. If you eat less meat and a little bit more plant-based, then you cut down your emissions by 0.5 ton. And if you insulate, as I see you, just a moment, and if you insulate your flat, you can also cut down your CO2 emissions. Yes.
So do we have a specific, like, in how much is less? How much is normal, and how much can fix or help to fix these problems?
So as you can see, in general, concerning Germany, the norm is you emit 10.8 tons of CO2 by living regularly. So the average German citizen. And if you do all of these things that are depicted here on the side, then you cut down your CO2 emissions by half. So all of these actions, they cut down your emissions. Of course, it's still not enough, but it's a start. And if people realize that they can change the way that they live or the way that they choose how to live, then they can go further. But really, the most important thing is to change. And for example, choosing ecological power and where is it? And for example, installing what's it called? Like when you take a shower that kind of saves the water. Those are action that you take once and that have an effect for a really long time. And other things you have to do every day and get used to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and when we buy a product, like, is there any measurement written on?
Not yet. It would be
Okay.
really nice, and there are organizations that try to create that. So, for example, there was an experiment in German supermarkets, I think 2 years ago, where the product had the label, it was about food, of how much it really cost. So the true cost economy was depicted. So people realized, okay, if I buy meat, then you need to have more investment in clearing up the water again because of all the dung, and then you have to clean the water out of from antibiotics, and you have the space and the food, and so it kind of really showed people what it actually cost, and they were nudged into different consumer decisions. But it is not the norm. We do have, with electricity, we have the EU label, A plus, B, C, D. That helps us to see how efficient a product is, but it's not an overall comparison of what your footprint is. I would love for it to be there already, because it's really difficult to research all of these things yourself, and it should be easy to make a
And
good
also
decision.
to guess how much CO2 I use.
Yes, exactly. Basically, less is more. Always buy used, change, lend things. So whenever you can prevent buying something, you do a fantastic thing already. And you save money. So it's really beneficial in so many ways. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you.
So what we need to realize is energy is not just electricity when we switch on the light switch, but it's also in our mobility, it's in our consumption, and it's in our food. Because if we think about the big industrial farms, the tractors are powered by fossil fuels. So energy is in everything, and we have so many different ways to influence things. It can be overwhelming, but it can be also really nice if you think about, well, what's my most important issue? You can find it and then start there. And so I don't know about Poland and Lithuania, but in Germany, we have two labels that help you as a consumer to know if the provider for electricity really changes things, because there are two scenarios. Often, you as a consumer, you can choose 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 a contract, and it says, well, it's partly green energy, but that means that the provider only bought green energy from somebody else and they didn't really install new power plants for renewable energies. But if you have these two labels, they are active in Germany, that signifies that with every electricity that you use, with every kilowatt, you are financing the change for more fossil, not for fossil, for more renewable energies. And so maybe you can look it up in Poland and Lithuania, what kind of labels you have. And so this is really helpful for either the students to talk about their parents with, or if they already live in their own flats, to check that, because it's maybe a few hours of research and then making the change, but then you have a lasting impact and you drive change concerning energy consumption and energy sources. So that's a really, really underlooked way of driving change. So now I would like to do a little exercise. We have the footprint and we have the handprint. So the footprint, if you remember, is the things that you yourself can do as an individual. Nobody stops you to change your ways. And then the handprint is whatever you can do in your community, in your social circle, to create change in the system itself. And so I would first of all like you to think about things that you can do as an individual to cut down your footprint concerning electricity. And I would like you to write that down into the chat. So this can be very small things, they can be big things, they can be things that we already talked about or something new. So please write in the chat what you as an individual can do to make your footprint, your negative impact on the environment, on nature, smaller in order to cut down your consumption, on electricity. Please write that in the chat. Whoops. And because I currently see nobody writing in the chat, is the question unclear? If yes, please ask a question, I can clarify. Aha. Yes. In contrast to keeping it in the plug the whole day, you mean? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You could also, yes, you could also wash at a lower temperature, for example, and then also decide what kind of provider you use. Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, please think about what you can do for increasing your handprint, for increasing your positive impact, for changing the structure itself. What kind of things can you do in order to make it the norm that it's that it's sustainable to use electricity? Mm-hmm. So use sun power devices, that's still the footprint. If you would talk to your, I don't know, uh, in your company and maybe buy one for the entire, for all the colleagues, they all could use it, and then that would be a handprint um, measure. So what can you do that changes the structure itself? So one thing that is always overlooked, yes, promote for energy efficient devices. So promote with your friends, with your family, with your colleagues. When you realize that there's a decision being made, you can approach the person in power and ask them, well, have you thought about sustainable issues? And maybe we can choose another model, for example. Talking with friends and talking about the issue is also a handprint measure. So making people aware of the issue and saying, well, it kind of affects us, we should do something about it, because lots of people think that they're the only one being worried or feeling anxiety, but in fact, it's the majority. And the more we talk about it, both the problems and the solutions, we feel less alone. Another handprint could be, I don't know, if you have a sports club, for example, and you have a match that you drive to, you could organize car sharing. And so it becomes a norm to travel together and not everybody arriving in their own cars. So always think about what you can do as an individual. We can all start today. But the most important thing is, how can we make it the norm that it's the sustainable movement? Yes, for example, join movements. You don't need to invent things new. You can just join a group and support them. You are part of a community. You feel your self-efficacy. You feel less alone. And it's really, really important also for mental health that you see that you can drive change. Yes, exactly. And also learn from young people. All right, thank you. So I think you understood these two things. We'll continue. I hope that you can still see my presentation. Does that work? Hold on. Hello, hello. Yes. Okay, now I will quickly present a part of the toolkit. So the Academy e.V. Developed one activity that you can also use. And it discusses, or it raises awareness of what kind of actions use up how much energy. So with your youth group or with your participants, you show them these charts. And these are just things that we do basically either every day or within a week several times. And you ask your participants to note down how often and how long they do one of these activities. And then they get another chart. And there it's listed how much energy does each activity use up. And then they can calculate with hand or with a calculator with their phone, whatever, depending on what kind of skill you want to train as well. They can calculate how much energy they use up with their everyday life. Of course, there's also online calculators to do that. But the pro effect of doing it by hand is really to get a profound understanding of the scales of what we're working with. And so once everybody has done that, there's a quiz. You can just scan over it. You'll get the toolkit after the presentation. And then the most important part is the discussion. So to reflect on what they've learned, to maybe realize, oh, I thought this would be not bad at all to use it for such a long time, or maybe you underestimated something, or you thought, well, it makes a big effect if I don't use that, but it's a tiny effect. So it just kind of helps them to realize where their possibilities for change are. And then you can also talk about, in question 2, if there are any cultural differences. So maybe concerning the climate, people use different kinds of energy because in colder countries, people maybe use a dryer, in other countries they don't, or whatever differences they can think of. So it can also be a really interesting starting point to spark a conversation. And so in order for students to make it more, what's it called? For them to follow through basically what they learned, is you can ask them in the end to write down a SMART goal. A SMART goal means it's something specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant to them, and it's time bound. So maybe, in during New Year's Eve or starting in the new year, people say, I want to do more sports. Well, you can't really measure when they've achieved their goal, because what does more mean and when did you achieve that? So a really smart goal could be, within the next 2 weeks, I will approach my teacher to talk to her about energy saving challenge in school. This would be a handprint goal. And so you could ask students after one of your activities to set themselves a challenge which they can tick off, or maybe then talk about why it was difficult to achieve after your activity, to implement it into their everyday life. So it's not just your activity, but they take it along with them. And it's also really important to really encourage people to do it badly, to do it imperfectly, because when we, as adults or as young adults, we have more fear of doing something wrong than children, and we feel judged. Maybe we also judge others. And it's so important to just start and to allow yourself to grow into it, to make mistakes, and to do it imperfectly. If I want to start using less plastics, it's okay if I'm stressed and I buy something that's still in plastics. I want to start and to change my routines, and it will take time. And so it's okay to kind of find your own balance, and you should really tell that to the students in order for them to be encouraged to do the first small step. You can also ask the question, what is the first small step that you can take towards goal X or Y? Then you could also encourage them to go to climate cafes. So depending on how deep you go in your activities, lots of emotions can come up. And if they feel alone, there are lots of spaces, lots of groups that offer places for reflection, for community. You can also start your own climate cafe or whatever your topic is. So to have a constant space for people to join and to share, so that they feel less alone. Because one of the main problems of our society is that we all feel isolated, and we think we're connected through social media, but everybody just sits in front of their own screen. And so it's really wonderful if you create true community by people meeting up and becoming active. And it's also really nice to see what good comes of all of these things. So the achievements that are already there. And so congratulations to Vilnius that they have been named the European Green Capital, and to see that people are profiting from the change. So of course, people can feel like things are being taken away from them if they are not allowed to drive the car anywhere they like. But what we gain is more air quality, more spaces in our cities to move around as humans, to play. We have more security, we have less accidents. So it's really, really important to shift our focus from what we are losing instead of what we are gaining. And so to showing regions, projects that already are successfully changing and implementing things can be really encouraging. And another thing is, I already mentioned it before, that we feel alone, or we feel like we are the minority. There has been done an international study where people, the global community, a representative amount has been asked, would you be willing to give 1% of your household income per month to invest in climate protection? And 69% on average said, yes, I would be willing. If countries or if people were more affected by climate change, they were even more willing to do so. If they were a little less affected by climate change, or they felt like they were less affected, the number was lower. But on average, 69% say, I'm happy to invest money. Of course, they did not have to invest money, so maybe the number would be down if you really give them a check and say, well, transfer the money now. But that's the majority. If, however, you ask the same people, think about 100 people, how many of those 100 people do you think will do the same? Then about other people, we say, it's only going to be 43 people. So we think less of our community than we think of ourselves. And then if I think, well, if you're not starting, then I'm not starting. So it's really important to make yourself aware of the fact that the majority wants climate change, and not climate change, climate action. The majority wants to become active. The majority wants more justice. We are in the majority, and this is really important for us to start making a change. You could also say, well, whatever I do doesn't really make a lot of change. If everybody says that, 8 billion say, oh, it's just a bit of trash. We have lots of trash in our world. And if 8 billion people say, today I will make a change, that's a whole lot of change. So we have lots of different opportunities to drive change and to create a more just and healthy world. And while it can be really overwhelming to think about global politics and big companies, we are capable of forming communities of driving change. Everything that we experience now as the norm has been achieved by people before us. So it's really important to realize that we are capable of achieving change. And so there are not only ecological tipping points, but there are also social tipping points. And for me, it's a really nice image to think of myself as maybe I'm the person who helps shift the perspective of somebody else, and then they become active. And maybe it's a really nice image for you to transfer to your youth or your participants, to say that they can, just by living the solution, just by showing that it can be done, inspiring other people. And so I say Jiki, Achu, and Danke for your time. And if there are any final questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Waiting for the questions. Feel free to write on the chat or just switch on your mics.
No question, but thank you. It was very helpful presentation for me. Danke.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can also get some comments.
Yeah, and it would, yeah, if there are no questions, I would be interested in, because I'm always insecure about how much do people that already work with youth concerning the topic, how much do they already know? So was there something that you did not know? Was it kind of like a repetition of what you already are aware of? So that would be helpful for me to get as a feedback if it was news to you or a different approach, for example.
Yeah, I can say you've given us a lot to reflect on. I learned really a lot. Thank you for this insightful presentation.
Thank you.
I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to keep the motivation of the people? Do you have any methodologies to keep this motivation? Because
Yes.
it's so easy to have it all the time.
Yeah, I understand. First of all, it's really important just to address that, to say it can be so exhausting to constantly drive change and to feel like you're running against a wall. You're not, but it feels like it. To address that and to just give space to these feelings, then a very basic thing can be, and it's so powerful, to just, whenever somebody else has changed something for you, if somebody helped you or if you've learned something from somebody, to say thank you. Because we often feel like we are not effective. We think we cannot change something because things feel so big and overwhelming. But if I realize that maybe without officially teaching something to somebody, I gave an helpful a nudge or a gesture that was meaningful for another person. If that person then says, "You helped me, thank you," or "I learned something from you," this is such a big present for that person. And if you continue to do that, then you just become aware of your self-efficacy. So that's the basis of me being or believing in myself. Well, if I can change something in my personal circle, I can change something on the bigger level. And to start with children, to show them that they can change things, and to say thank you to teachers, to parents, to colleagues, people on the street all the time. So just to be really honoring the effects that we have on each other. So that's like the one profound thing that you can do on a personal level. And then it also is just about creating community and to have fun. So lots of climate activists are sometimes asked, well, how can you bear it? You spend so much time with the climate crisis and all the problems, but they always answer, and it's the same for me. Well, but I'm always working towards the solutions. I'm part of a group of people that drive change, and it's really meaningful and connecting, and it should be fun. So you can have a party while collecting trash, or it should be something that drives community, and to make your progress visible. It's really important to celebrate your wins, basically, so that people know that they achieved something. And it's also okay not to give 100% all the time, to talk about self-care in the way of really charging your social battery or charging time alone, or yeah, whatever people need in order to recharge. And yeah, for example, if there is a political intense time like it was in Germany in the past months, it's okay after that to not feel like I can rally for the next thing, but to kind of reboot and then start again. Thank you for the question. It's really important.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions or comments?
So you will get the presentation, of course, in the end. I'll send it to Frau Chidlak, and then she can pass it on.
That was my question. Thank you for your time and effort. It was really nice to hear all the new things and reflect on it.
Thank you so much. And for me, it also really